Hi there, welcome to another video. Today I want to talk about close reading. What is close reading, first of all? Close reading is the analysis of a text, whether it be poetry, prose, non-fiction, fiction, whatever, to analyze its meaning, its use of various aesthetic and semantic techniques, and to come to a conclusion about the overall significance and meaning of the work. This is important not only when you're writing literary essays, which is where a lot of you will have seen it. It's, pretty much mandatory in VCE and also in university literature and English subjects. But it's also important, or rather useful, for when you want to analyze pieces of writing to see how it achieves certain effects, how it achieves emotional effects, and it can help you improve your writing. So I'm going to assume, just because of how common it is, that a lot of you have already done this before, but I just want to go through a couple of examples and show you how I do close reading, and how you can use it to improve your own work. And please keep in mind that I'm not an expert on this by any means. I'm not a university professor, I'm not a literature teacher, I'm not even really a published writer. I'm only doing this because I do get really good results with my essays, and I do think that I have some interesting thoughts on this. So, the first example is Sylvia Plath's poem Morning Song. First thing that I noticed reading this poem is the rhythm. So we go, here I've put dashes above the lines, dashes and slashes, with the slashes representing stressed syllables and the dashes representing unstressed syllables. So it's love set you going like a fat gold watch. The midwife slapped your foot soles, and your bald cry took its place among the elements. Our voices echo, magnifying your arrival. New statue in a drafty museum. Your nakedness shadows our safety. We stand round blankly as walls. I'm no more your mother than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. All night your moth breath flickers among the flat pink roses. I wake to listen. A far sea moves in my ear. One cry, and I stumble from bed, cow-heavy and floral, in my Victorian nightgown. Your mouth opens clean as a cat's. The window square whitens and swallows its dull stars, and now you try, your handful of notes. The clear vowels rise like balloons. So there I was really emphasizing stress syllables, or where I thought the stress syllables fell. But I've, of course, indicated it here. So you see, in the first stanza, it's very, very irregular. It sort of goes stressed, unstressed, unstressed, stressed, then 3 unstressed, then 3 stressed, then unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, then 3 unstressed right in a row, and so on. There's no regularity to it at all. And it creates this kind of jarring, abrupt rhythm, which is then offset again by the, which is accentuated even more by the end stopping, which means the line ends, the sentence ends where the line ends. So, love set you going like a fat gold watch, full stop. And then also, we have took its place among the elements, which is enjambed, but then it sort of ends. So the mix of enjambment, which is to run the line on from the run the thought on over 2 lines, the mix of that with the end stopping creates this sort of jarring, jerky rhythm, and that continues in the first 3 stanzas. The other thing that you might notice is I've highlighted in yellow quite a few words. First of all, the phrase fat gold watch. Plath is comparing a baby, likening a baby to an inanimate object, a gold watch. And notice also that a watch is a timekeeping device, and we've just talked about the rhythm. Keep that in mind, it'll be important later. And then we see bald, echo, drafty, blankly. It sort of implies an absence of something, whether it's and this sort of rawness, that this echo meaning sort of is very open spaces with very sparse spaces. Bald, obviously no hair, but that's not what it means here, but the connotation is still there. Drafty, there's very isolated, lonely. So there's an absence, and it creates an absence and a distance between the narrator and the child in question. And we see that again in the comparison of a baby to a statue, which is very similar to the fat gold watch line. It's almost like Plath's narrator is observing the child without really connecting with it. It's just some interesting thing that she's looking at. And it culminates in the line, "I'm no more your mother," than the cloud that distills a mirror to reflect its own slow effacement at the wind's hand. So we come to this conclusion where the mother doesn't know how to cope with motherhood, and she is sort of denying her own responsibility at this point in the poem. Her rhythm has been put off by the arrival of the child. I've also noted that there's a prevalence of D, T, CH, B, C, P sounds. And these aren't always harsh sounds, but in this context they are harsh sounds. So you've got fat, gold, watch. And the forcefulness of those one-syllable words, along with the sounds that are accented there, really create this sort of harsh cadence. And you get bald cry, echo, blankly again, drafty, nakedness, and so on. So they really set the mood for this part of the poem. Then there comes a shift in the second half of the poem. All night your moth breath flickers among the flat pink roses. I wake to listen. A far sea moves in my ear. So notice that Plath uses th in moth breath and flickers among the flat pink roses. So these are softer sounds like TH and F. And this continues throughout the stanzas. She also uses them closer together than she does in the first half, even when she's using C sounds, like your mouth opens clean as a cat's. So even there it creates an alliterative consonant quality to this section, which makes it feel a little bit more intimate and a little bit more normal. It's not as jarring. And we can see that the rhythm reflects this too. Let's look at the last stanza. The window square whitens and swallows its dull stars, and now you try your handful of notes. Clear vowels rise like balloons. So you've got da 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 da. You get the idea. It's a bit difficult to do it when you're not saying the words, but it's a much more regular rhythm. So basically, if I were to write now from all of those points that we've just looked at, as well as I forgot to mention that the descriptions of the baby and also of Plath start to become more animalistic, more animate. So moth breath, your mouth opens clean as a cat's, and she describes herself as cow heavy. So with all these facts, I can come to a conclusion about what the poem means. And I would argue that it means that it's about, a mother who's just had a child, and she's, in the beginning, finding it very hard to connect with the child, but finding it very hard to go back to the way life was, because life is not the way it was. All her daily rhythm and routine has been thrown off. And it leads to a struggle to connect with her child. But then, by the end of the poem, she's kind of found a new rhythm for her life, which accommodates the child, and she's begun to grow fond of the child and connect with it as mother and child do. And we see that in the rhythm, we see that in the way that she describes the child, and we see that also in the sounds that Plath uses, because these kind of create this empathetic space where we move from feeling that distance that the mother feels to feeling that intimacy that the mother feels in the first and second half of the poem, respectively. Now, if you're still stuck after finding all of those things, because sometimes it just comes into your head, sometimes it doesn't, you might want to ask yourself some questions. So I've put some questions at the bottom here. So the rhythmic variations, both metrically and in the use of enjambment and end stopping, are suggestive of something about the meaning of the poem. What is it? And why does the rhythm become smoother as the poem progresses? Why does Plath emphasize different sounds in the first 3 stanzas to the last 3? And then you might want to note certain words and phrases that you feel are significant. Here I've highlighted them in yellow, but you might not. What do they suggest about Plath or the narrator's attitudes towards the child? Do these attitudes change? So basically the process that you want to go through is you read a piece for the first time, just enjoying it, though you should take note of anything that sticks out as significant to you, whether it's a word, a sentence, an entire paragraph or stanza, or any small detail, like how I looked at the rhythm. And then read through it again, read specifically those parts again, and read them aloud, and make notes. And then once you've made the notes, try and pull them all together into an interpretation, asking questions of the text if you have to. Like, what does this mean? So on and so forth. And then you can write your interpretation. That's if you're writing an essay, though it can help even if you're doing an aesthetic analysis. And that's what we're going to move on to next, is an aesthetic analysis. This is more a reading that will help focusing on elements that you might be able to use in your own writing. It's a passage from 2 Gallants, a short story by James Joyce. This is a story about 2 friends who basically illicit, you know, pimp a local slave, like a local maid, to become a prostitute. And this is a description of one of the main characters. Corley's stride acknowledged the compliment. The swing of his burly body made his friend execute a few light skips from the path to the roadway and back again. Corley was the son of an inspector of police, and he had inherited his father's frame and gut. He walked with his hands by his sides, holding himself erect and swaying his head from side to side. His head was large, globular, and oily. It sweated in all weathers, and his large round hat, set upon it sideways, looked like a bulb which had grown out of another. He always stared straight before him as if he were on parade, and, when he wished to gaze after someone in the street, it was necessary for him to move his body from the hips. At present he was about town. Whenever any job was vacant, a friend was always ready to give him the hard word. He was often to be seen walking with policemen in plain clothes, talking earnestly. He knew the inner side of all affairs and was fond of delivering final judgments. He spoke without listening to the speech of his companions. His conversation was mainly about himself, what he had said to such a person and what such a person had said to him, and what he had said to settle the matter. When he reported these dialogues, he aspirated the first letter of his name after the manner of Florentines. Lenehan offered his friend a cigarette. As the two young men walked on through the crowd, Corley occasionally turned to smile at some of the passing girls, but Lenehan's gaze was fixed on the large faint moon circled with a double halo. He watched earnestly the passing of the grey web of twilight across its face. So, again, I've written some questions, and it might be good to start with those questions. What does Joyce do that gives us such a vivid picture of Corley? I would argue what he does is give us a very visual, sensory description. And of course, this is kind of common sense, but it's important to note. And he doesn't use cliches. He uses interesting imagery, because Corley is not a cliche. He's an interesting character. And Joyce doesn't just give us physical description. Even though what he describes is Corley's physical attributes, they suggest something deeper. They suggest something about his character. So let's have a look at this. First of all, his head was large, globular, and oily. It sweated in all weathers, and his large round hat, set upon it sideways, looked like a bulb which had grown out of another. It suggests this it suggests this parasite growing out of Corley. Suggesting this corruption of his spirit. And the imagery is phallic too, which is significant considering the sexual nature of the business that the two friends are about to undertake that day. We can also look at this. He always stared straight before him as if he were on parade, and when he wished to gaze after someone in the street, it was necessary for him to move his body from the hips. So, this suggests that Corley is stuck in place. He's not moving forward in life. And then the next sentence says, at present he was about town, and about town means out of work. So, he's unemployed. And so, how do we feel about Corley? You know, he's been corrupted, but perhaps that corruption hasn't been his own fault, but rather the fault of systems out of his control. You know, he's unemployed and now he's being forced to pimp. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, because Joyce does not want us to sympathise with Corley. You know, as we can see here, he's very full of himself. He spoke without listening to the speech of his companions. His conversation was mainly about himself. And also, he was often to be seen walking with policemen in plain clothes, talking earnestly. So he's an informer, but it seems that the police don't really want anything to do with him. The fact that he's talking earnestly suggests that he's putting in a bit too much effort to try and get them to listen to him, and they're not doing so. So he's a bit of a pathetic character. He's a character that, you know, has been corrupted, whether by society or by his own inherent character flaws. He wants to become higher at one of the big people in society, but he can't actually make it there. He's got aspirations above his station. And he's also not a very nice person. Then there's a little pun that he aspirated the first letter of his name after the manner of Florentines, which means he said Hawley, and the story being about pimping, this is highly significant. Then, the last thing that is notable is the large faint moon circled with a double halo, which Lenehan watches earnestly as a grey web of twilight passes across its face. Now, traditionally the moon is a symbol of fertility and femininity, so the twilight as a grey web suggests this sort of ensnaring of that fertility and femininity. It suggests the prostitution of the maid at the end of the story, and it also tells us that it will not give her the freedom that she thinks that it will, but rather a different sort of servitude. So you can see that this is a very short passage. It's, you know, something like 200, 300 words. There's 300 words, roughly. 298. And we have such an idea of the characters. Joyce manages to give a physical description that also gives an idea of Corley's metaphysical state, his spiritual state. And he does this through symbolism. He uses words very carefully, like earnestly, to also give a sense of who Corley is, of the fact that he is someone who has dreams above his station, of someone who is a bit of a nuisance but doesn't realise it, and so on and so forth. And there's a vague feeling of unease in the way that he describes him, because it's so unpleasant with the, you know, the oily head and that sweats in all weathers, and the bulb, like, and the imagery of the bulb, and how he can't, and how he doesn't seem to move. He moves very stiffly. So it's a very stifling sort of imagery, and creates this vague feeling of unease. And he uses ambiguity again. Maybe I'm wrong about earnestly, but that's what I think. He doesn't make that entirely clear, but there's this vague feeling of unease around it, as there is with the grey web of twilight, which Joyce uses to foreshadow the end of the story and illustrate theme. So you can use symbolism in so many ways, not only to foreshadow and illustrate theme, as we see in that last little paragraph, but also to give a suggestion of character outside of physical description. You know, this is almost the pathetic fallacy, which is using natural settings, descriptions of natural settings, to give a suggestion of an inner state of a character, which was used a lot in Romantic era literature. So, you know, these are things that you can think about and use in your own stories, in your own poetry, in your own anything. And I'm not suggesting that you go out and copy James Joyce completely, although that can actually be a good exercise because, you know, imitation, you get used to that, you start getting more of a handle on technique, and then you can sort of expand beyond and come up with your own style. It's quite a good exercise, doing a little pastiche. But you can, depending on your level of confidence, you can take these techniques and use them to your own style within a piece of writing. And so I encourage you, whenever you come across a passage in a piece of writing that you're reading, whether it's a novel, a short story, whatever, that you take note of the passages that you want to read again, the passages that really make you stop and go, that was really effective, that was really lovely, or whatever, that make you stop. And you just make a note of them, keep reading, and then you go back and read them again and try and figure out what makes them so interesting, why they work, what they're doing that you can use to improve your writing, and what they're doing within the story, aesthetically, anything like that. So that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you've gotten something out of it. If you have any ideas, suggestions about things that I might have missed in this video, or questions, comment below. If you have suggestions for future videos, also comment down below. Please like and subscribe to my channel. I post pretty regularly. I've been quite busy lately, so sorry for the hiatus, but I'll be posting whenever the inspiration hits, which is fairly regularly. And so if you want to be notified of new content, then please subscribe. Share with anyone that you think would be interested in this sort of content. And you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter. The links will be down below. You can visit my website, ishanmorrisgraywrites.wordpress.com. You can join my writers group, the Writers Network, on Facebook. The links to those will be down there as well. And I will see you in the next video. Thanks very much.